This is Mindset for Success with your host, Dr. Leslie Knutson. Each week, she will interview women entrepreneurs to explore the unconscious psychological struggles they faced as they build their businesses and how they overcame them. Here's your host, Leslie Knutson.
I'm so excited to welcome our next guest, Dr. Aizenstros. Janae is the chairman and the CEO of Ahavo Group Global, AGG, a woman-led modern media parent company that serves Fortune and multinational media companies in 15 locations globally. This year, she reached a new height in her career when she scaled Ahavo Group Global to 9 figures. She's an internationally recognized leader and is the creator of the first impact fund in Canada, led by an Afro-Canadian woman that focuses on women entrepreneurs creating social impact through technology. It's such a pleasure to have you here today, Janae. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, Leslie.
Janae, as you know, it takes a lot to be a successful female entrepreneur, and business acumen is key, but we rarely talk about the psychological challenges that women often face to achieve that success. And I refer to these as those negative and sometimes persistent thoughts that create doubt or undermine success and can destroy self-confidence and risk-taking. Could you share with us, Janae, a bit about your inspirational journey of how and why you decided 9 years ago, at the age of just 31, to become an entrepreneur of a consultancy company empowering women? I imagine it might have had some risk for you.
Well, there definitely was some risk, and it didn't initially start that way. You know, I was never focused on Fortune Corp's media companies or even consultancy. It's that actually came after when we pivoted the company in 2016. How I started was by just taking my gifts or my God-given talents and just trying to put them to work. I was going through a lot of life transition at the time. When I started my company, I did ask for a divorce. I was a mom of 2 little kids under the age of 5. And life was very uncertain, and there's a lot of fear because I wasn't really anchored in anything at the time as I am now. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like I was always, I had to find my way through a lot of very tumultuous, life-altering dynamics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how were you able to do that? How were you able to make your way through life tumultuous dynamics?
Well, as I was building, when I started my creative agency at the time, or full-service creative agency at the time, I was also podcasting on a lot of different types of topics: women's empowerment, leadership, spirituality, religion, emotional awareness, and just topics that really were where I was on my journey, and it gave me access to interviewing some of the world's most renowned leaders, healers, celebrities, thought leaders, on topics around leadership, emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, spirituality, healing, with just different healing modalities. In the process, I realized that I was just healing myself in that process. And there was part of the tools that helped me walk through, but I don't think anything really prepares you for entrepreneurship. I think a lot of times, and the way that society almost frames it, it's like, yeah, you have an idea, put it together, and then all of a sudden you're going to turn it to Jeff Bezos. No, it's totally unrealistic. Mm-hmm. You know, many people go through this up and down and up and down, and there's a lot of failure, and you have to really become resilient and failing forward.
Mm-hmm. Tell me something. If you started at such a tumultuous time, how come you decided to go forward with it and not wait to a less tumultuous time?
Because I learned really early, so even prior to entrepreneurship, I probably learned this in my first marriage, that there's never going to be a right time. Mm-hmm. The right time is And so you're just going to have to jump in and do it anyway. And that came from when my first husband and I wanted to get married. We wanted to, we were like, well, we should wait for the right time when we should get married. But there was never going to be a right time. Life doesn't stand still for anything. And so you either keep in step with it or you get left behind. And so I just decided, I took that same attitude from in my early 20s into my 30s that, you know what, I was just going to jump. I mean, I met even like an author, Nancy Levin, along the way, who was the Hay House events director, and she wrote a book called Jump and Your Life Will Appear, which reaffirmed me along the way. I feel like God had these little milestones that reminded me on the right as I was failing forward.
You talk about how fun it is also when we talked earlier about learning new things and to be true to yourself, and how when everyone zigged, you zagged. I can imagine that to be as passionate and determined as you are, sometimes things can become tiring and even lonely. Have you ever experienced any of this? And if so, what did you do to overcome this?
Yeah, well, loneliness has been a constant narrative in my life. You know, a lot of people meet me, but I have a very diverse and complex upbringing, socialization, background that lends to that. And so even I was lonely a lot because I just did not fit in. And that meant, and even though I'm a Black woman, a woman of color, I just didn't even fit in amongst other Black women as well because of growing up outside of the community. So I just became used to living in an all-white community, not fitting in, and then also trying to insert myself into my community and not fitting in either. You know, and so I actually came to the place of like where I think God showed me you don't need to fit in, and there's been constant like a conversation about that throughout even to where I am today. You don't need to fit in. I zagged because I didn't, when I was young, I always knew something was different about me, whether it was weird, whatever it was, I just knew something was different. And I decided to I was beating to my own drum. And when you get used to being alone or standing always on the other side, you just go, you go for it. And you just, because you have to stand on that side. When you just become, sort of thing prepares you for what you're about to jump into.
And why do you think you were able so early on to stand on your own? What was did you feel like you were capable of taking care of yourself, or you had enough resources to lean on if you needed to?
Actually, I didn't have enough resources. You know, I grew up in marginalized circumstances, and then so it was never, I always share with people, you know, there's a perception at times around me where people think that I came from money. I did not come from money. My parents were immigrants. I'm a first generation Canadian. I started the first 9 years of my life in a housing project. So it was not easy, but I will share with you, socialization and environment are so powerful in how they shape your perception and your level of belief. I had the ability to see who I was. I grew up in an environment too that maybe was bubbled. You know, I was never taught to feel inadequate for being who I was or the color of my skin or any of that. And so I'm very supportive of people that unfortunately don't have that conversation, but I also have to remain true to my part of the conversation. And when you don't have, if you're not growing up feeling inadequate about what you look like, or it doesn't mean I didn't experience insecurities, 100%. I still have them. But I wasn't allowing my insecurities to define who I was. And also I didn't have an environment that reinforced my insecurities either. And so I was able to, and I always had like great, amazing mentors along the way that were always cheering me on and healing and feeling, and like feeling and helping me feel my way through these circumstances. So,
so you didn't get stuck in the insecurities either, right? If the mentors kind of. Yeah, I didn't get stuck in the insecurities, and I wasn't. I was just. It doesn't mean that I didn't get stuck in places in my life. But I didn't stay stuck in those insecurities long, because when you're a child that grows up in a tumultuous dynamic,
you either freeze or you fight. And I've been fighting, and I think just my mom's example, she was always fighting. Even when she even got stuck in her own, she was always fighting. And so if you're able to be better, you can be better and do better in the world. That's why visibility is important. But I also share with people, too, is that visibility isn't always about seeing someone who's just like you doing it. Sometimes it's looking at other people in your environment that have overcome and have inspirational stories, and not getting locked into only, unless the person has your exact narrative or shares your culture or your skin color or all of that type of stuff. You can learn from everybody. And if you're open, truly, truly open to learning from everything that life gives to you, you can, as Elizabeth Gilbert taught us, eat, pray, love. You will have that type of experience.
Let me ask you this. You talk about entrepreneurs not necessarily having a happy life. So in terms of how did you persevere early on when you were setting up your business, when things were not necessarily happy or easy?
Well, I wouldn't say that entrepreneurs don't have a happy life. I think a happy life or a joyful life is a choice. Happiness for me is that's fleeting and it's very temporal. But joyfulness is this anchor of sustainability that goes down deeply rooted into your soul and sustains you. It's like an aspect of contentment. So what I will share is this. What allowed me to persevere was I would share highly successful people I will say we're hardwired to not settle for just good enough. And a few years ago, I came to the realization is that it didn't matter about how many material things I acquired, if they were temporal, because I was never happy once I hit a milestone, whether I was buying a dream home or getting the car that I wanted. Those were temporal. It didn't matter how many places I traveled to. Why was I walking around without peace? And then I realized, so walking around without peace because I lost my sense of connection to the source, the very divine creativity and fluid energy that flows through all of us. And so when I got anchored in that again, I discovered that I could have the peace that passes all understanding, and I could want that. But it took work in terms of looking at my life through what I call the 7 pillars of harmonious living. Looking at what is my relationship with source, what do I do for play, what do I do to keep my mindset in check, how does it affect my business, wealth, and success, what healing modalities am I open to, how am I taking care of my health and my physical body, what am I giving to my community, how am I loving my family and my friends and myself ultimately. And so when I started looking at myself from that perspective, I was like, wow, I have the ability to expand capacity based upon who I am, the very core root. And I just been able to use that as a template and also a guide as to when I'm happy and when do I feel too depleted or when do I need to fill that cup again.
And how long ago did you learn that, who I am? Or is it sort of evolving and it continues to evolve?
It's always been continuously evolving, but I've become very anchored in that. Like I'm 40 now, and I've become very anchored in that in the last 4 to 5 years, and that came walking through seasons of intentional betrayals, like horrific betrayals of privacy. That came through having, walking through public humiliation, slander, and things that were through. People were writing stories, but I think sometimes God allows those experiences to chip away at the armor and bring forth this vulnerability. It reminds me of this phrase, you take a heart of stone and make it a heart of flesh again. And I think for me, what has happened with me is that I was very callous and I allowed my walls to become shattered and broken down. And I started looking at some of those obstacles were actually the catalysts and the healing tools to chipping away at that armor that allowed me to show up as my authentic self. And so I just feel really inspired and empowered now. And I just want women to feel beautiful. Like I feel beautiful and I want them to look at that.
Let me ask you something else. do you, in looking backwards and talking about your upbringing, do you think your upbringing hurt or helped you master the mindset for success that you have?
Both. I think that when you grow up in an environment where, I grew up in seeing a lot of graphic violence, and I bore witness to trauma. Meanwhile, even trauma sometimes it's different when trauma is imprinted physically on your being and your soul, and then you're bearing witness to it. So I think I learned very early that I have the ability to change this, and I'm going to become the very thing that I did not want to be. And I will share. It's a lifelong journey, but it's really the foundation where I had to onset a lot of emotional, intelligent, and mental health care practices at a very early age, where a lot of people don't really. Some cultures are not even open to that. And like a good portion of the Black community are just now having the conversation the last 10 years around mental health, right? Whereas the rest of the world outside of that have been talking about emotional intelligence. And so a part of the disconnection that I have felt in my journey, even with my own community, was that it was like, you're talking about the problem. I'm actually speaking about the solution. And so when I talk about how that led to my success is emotional. Doesn't mean, I think that's the one part that we get very lost in entrepreneurship. We think that there will never be any weapons formed, but there will always be weapons formed against us, but they will not prosper if you continue to move forward and look at them through the eyes of light. And what I mean by looking at through the light of looking at through the eyes of, even though this was painful, this was still for my good, and everything will work together for the good of those that believe in that good. And I think that's been the problem for many people. The moment that something bad happens to us, we believe it's not a part of the source's plan for us, or we're going the wrong path, but not understanding the source has already preordained our steps. They already knew we were going to be there. We already knew that we were going to be there. So there's not really a wrong or right choice. It's just moving forward in the direction that you believe is a choice for you. So therefore, when obstacles do appear, they can be defined in that moment. And we need to stop trying to living in the future and living in the past. We need to be present, so that way when we do collide with the future, we know how to walk through that season.
Right, and it's sort of like it's a theme of what you are saying sort of over this podcast too, is not to get stuck, whether it's the weapons against us or it's the inadequacy of the moment, and to try to just look forward and align yourself with, a positive look forward.
Yeah, it very much is. It's all how we reframe it. A lot of times I actually just walked through, even doing the mental work myself right now again, where I'm like, you know what, I've been thinking this way for so long, and how did I start thinking this way? I created this storyline so that way I could cope with the pain that I was walking through. But if I had just brought the pain to the surface and ripped off the Band-Aid, then it doesn't mean that I still didn't have to walk through the pain, but it wouldn't have been this turning into this festering pool that just became a pylon of other things. So sometimes we become our worst enemies because we are in so much, we almost hide because we feel we don't want to be exposed for who we are. Yeah, and I always share, if we just, and I think this is also the other thing too, for those that are listening, exposing yourself does not mean exposing yourself to other people. There are circumstances for that, and it's fine if you do that. But sometimes it's just exposing yourself in that private space to yourself, in that mirror. I didn't need to run to tell somebody that, I'm feeling fractured here, I'm broken here. I could have just said, hey, Janae, it's okay. You went through the situation. But a lot of us are not trained to do that, We're trained to just always seeking something outside of ourselves in order to fulfill ourselves.
let me ask you something else. As a successful and generous businesswoman, you have the opportunity to find new female-led projects. To fund new female-led projects. What do you think having good founder DNA is?
Good founder DNA? Oh, wow. Good
Just
founder
something easy.
That is someone that is receptive, someone that has an idea that isn't just, it's not money motivated. It is resourceful. It has sustainability practices built into it. It feels intentional. It has the utmost clarity. And having people that also manage from soul, lead from soul, not manage, but lead from soul, are what I found are great leaders. People that are doing this, like they would have been doing this anyway. It wasn't like, oh, well, I saw Bill Gates was able to build a $1 billion company, so that is now my. I think that's what people also forget. Like Elon Musk did not create Tesla because he was focused on, oh, I need to become a billionaire. He was like, wow, wouldn't it be cool that we could create an electrical car, or wouldn't it be cool if we could create a spaceship that could do X, Y, and Z? And he was coming more from that standpoint. So we could get people to focus more on creating from a place of intentionality and desire for change instead of creating from a place of just looking at our primitive needs. And not to say that our needs are not important, but I also feel like for me, what I've discovered in this is that when I was focused on chasing money, I was operating in a high level of scarcity. But when I shifted my focus and allowed money to chase me, it became intentional. And money actually gravitated to me quicker. And so I share with founders, when you embark on this journey, entrepreneurship is a journey of self. It's actually one of the greatest blessings of my life to be an entrepreneur, because it's not just about creating a company. It's about developing an ecosystem that has tentacles and people. It's responsible for other people's lives and how you impact them and what you impart on them and how you lead them. And so I don't want people to ever think that, well, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to be at the top and I'm going to be the CEO, because that's really not the sustainability of what is happening and what is necessary for us to move into the future of entrepreneurship. The future of entrepreneurship is very much soul leading and sustainable. And when we look at soul purpose, people need to know that the greatest ideas that have the sustainability came out of people that became obsessed with an idea that was very much soul driven. Your soul is what gets you through the times when you can't pay your staff, or like the bills are due, and all of the headaches that come with entrepreneurship. If you're just focused on money, those people crumble and fall. And all of us talk about this behind the scenes. It doesn't have sustainability because it's not. Money is only a piece of the impact, not the entire impact.
Right, and I think what you're also saying is it's important to let things evolve naturally and not push them. Because if it's natural, then I guess you find more of your true authentic voice. Whereas if you're pushing it, then maybe not so much.
Yeah, and that's a hard balance, because there's always this inner conflict with every person naturally.
Right.
But for the entrepreneur, you can become very convoluted and noisy in your spirit, because you're just like, as your company and you grow. So this is why it's important for you to fill your capacity wells and expand your capacity. Because if you don't do that, it's easy to become distracted. It's easy to lose sight of what your role is. It's easy to just be tossed to and fro. And the leaders that create impact and change, and some of the world's ultra high net worth people, all of us have this in common, is that I was unshakable because I was anchored and connected to something. And that anchoring and connection, if you were to talk to me about in the days of building my company, my kids were under 5 years old, 5 and under, and I was working 16, 18-hour days, okay? I was living in a suitcase. I went back to live with my mom. And I was living, like sleeping on a twin-sized bed. People just don't know parts of that story. I had to go back to even with the husband that I left, right? And people don't know, you cannot be driven, if you're only driven by money, you can't make it through those types of dynamics that I watched through.
Right.
What drives you is that there's this incessant calling where it's like, I have to keep going. I have to keep going. What if I get, and it doesn't mean that I didn't want to give up, but it was my soul that was pulling me forward. And when people truly understand that, they will understand that that's how you become successful. It's when your soul drives you to a place that you would never have embarked on. You had no idea.
Right. Jenny, we're going to have to stop, but I want to thank you so much for sharing with our listeners today your motivation for why you chose to be a female entrepreneur and also how you overcame some of the psychological obstacles that you encountered during your inspirational journey. Where can people reach you to learn more about your work?
People can reach me to learn more about my work by visiting JanaeAizenstros.com. That's JanaeAizenstros.com, or they can Google me. They can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Aizenstros.
Great. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate, again, you coming on.
This podcast is brought to you by Women Entrepreneurs Global, the first startup studio and digital DIY startup platform for women. For more information on her guests, this podcast, and many other female founder programs, please visit womenentrepreneurs.global. We believe in open and non-stigmatizing dialogue about the hidden psychological difficulties experienced by many successful entrepreneurs and highlighting the strategies used to overcome them, such as the fear of failure, of not being good enough, and that loud, chattering internal critic is critical to helping other founders achieve success. Please join her next week for more Mindset for Success stories. That was Dr. Leslie Knutson, and you can drop her a line at dr.leslieKnutson@dr.leslieKnutson.com.